You're at the Real Turkey channel. This is your host and commentator Atilla Yeşilada. We provide analysis not only Turkish economics, finance and business news, but politics as well, because in particular in Turkey, politics and economy are so intertwined, it's impossible to distance them from each other. Today I'm going to talk about my prediction that Mr. Erdogan is rapidly losing power and he has to change, or Turkey may face early elections next year. AKP's disintegration continues. I have put graphics. I think I have put graphics, I'm not so sure, from a latest poll by an agency called Metropole, which is fairly accurate in its predictions and completely honest and impartial in my experience. It lists the three topmost concerns of participants. Number one, economic stagnation. Number two, rising unemployment. Number three, Syrian refugees. As you know, Turkey hosts officially 3.6 billion, maybe 4 million Syrian refugees. And there are social friction between Turks and Syrian Arabs, which are ethnically different and have different customs and habits. So Mr. Erdogan is dealing with these three very thorny problems. He understands the need to immediately boost economic growth, but he goes about it the wrong way. He's forcing state banks to give out subsidized loans. He's trying to bail out everyone, in particular the construction industry, using state funds. For instance, Turkey just established its own reassurance or reinsurance company, but reinsurance companies need to be extremely well capitalized, and where the Treasury will find the money to capitalize its new domestic insurance company is everyone's guess. Fiscal performance is deteriorating rapidly, as I had mentioned in my past videos, and there is really a serious danger that in its haste to accelerate the Turkish economy, Mr. Erdogan would force central bank to cut interest rates too rapidly. Now already Turkey's average savings deposit rate for 3-month deposits is 14% gross, and the inflation expectations in the 24-month horizon are roughly 10.5%. So, and usually these expectations understate the true inflation. So the Turkish saver doesn't make any money on Turkish deposits, as a result of which we have seen massive dollarization. As of last week, the current hard currency holdings of Turkish citizens and corporates rose to $191 billion, roughly 50% of all the savings in the banking industry, and a historical record. And that will continue as inflation rises in November and interest rates keep going down. Who would want to keep Turkish lira when it's not yielding anything in terms of real interest rates? It has been a good year for emerging markets. On average, there has been ups and downs, but emerging markets have relatively done well, at least in terms of attracting financial capital. But Turkey is not one of them. Over the last 12 months, Turkey has lost roughly $2.5 billion of hot money. FDI is very low, and Turkish banks are only renewing 65% of their syndicated loans. So there is a currency crunch in the economy, which is not only bad for inflation and monetary policy, but also substantially a sign of a massive lack of trust in the future, which would obviously affect consumer and business investment sentiment. Mr. Erdogan doesn't have a way to deal with these problems, and his party is rapidly disintegrating, as I've said. Since the second Istanbul elections, there has been roughly half a dozen polls, with the exception of roughly a dozen polls, with the exception of two, Gezici and Metropole. The average of these polls revealed that Ali Babacan and Professor Ahmet Davutoglu, former lieutenants of Erdogan and currently his rivals, launching new parties, could combined get 15% of the national vote, most of which would come from AKP and other right-wing parties. So, as if Mr. Erdogan fails to improve the economy in the winter, I think the migration from AKP to alternatives would accelerate. Already, we have specific data that shows that AKP's registered membership has declined roughly 1 billion or 10% over the last year. And AKP rank and file, experienced people who have been on the ground for 10-15 years, who had resigned recently because to them AKP has lost its vision and mission, suggests that the exodus of registered members is accelerating. This is an extremely bad situation for Mr. Erdogan. What does Erdogan need to do? Well, three things. First, reestablish better relations with the West, where all the money is coming from, as well as our trade and tourism. In particular, in Syria, it needs to reconcile his differences with United States to avoid costly Kaatsa type of sanctions. It needs to enforce American sanctions against Iran, because otherwise Turkey would be slapped with sanctions again. And at home, it needs to reach out to the opposition and adopt more orthodox economic policies along the lines suggested by IMF or any investment banking research. Tighter monetary policy, tighter fiscal policy, and structural reforms. I personally believe Mr. Erdogan is capable of doing these because he's a survivalist, and as soon as he smells the danger that he may lose his party or the upcoming elections, he would certainly make a 90-degree U-turn and do exactly the opposite of what he advocates currently. But if he doesn't, I think Turkey is facing another very harsh winter. And by the end of the winter, he may not only lose a substantial portion of his party membership, but also the sitting congressmen and congresswomen to alternative parties, which would raise the specter of early elections. Already, the main opposition party leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, says the public wants early elections, and early election talk is devastating to economic confidence. So really, the bells are ringing for Mr. Erdogan. Unless he changes his ways and reforms Turkish policy approach, both in diplomatic terms and economic terms, he is going to lose power. Turkey is in the midst of a massive, irresistible, and historic political transition. At the end of it, Erdogan may remain in power, but his powers would be drastically reduced. You have just watched another episode of Real Turkey channel by commentator Atilla Yeşilada. We're going to accelerate our production because our reviewership is rapidly increasing from roughly 10 to 15, which is a 50% increase. But if you like these videos, share them, curse at us, and do subscribe to listen to more of this nonsense. Bye-bye now.